Today, we're taking a model from the mortal realms and throwing it headfirst into the grim darkness of the far future. The Curseling from Age of Sigmar is about to be reborn as a master of possession for my Wordbearer's army. So grab your copy of the Word, and let's get started. Despite playing orcs, one of the most conversion-friendly factions in Warhammer, I've somehow never done really much converting. It's always been on my list, but I just haven't gotten around to it. That changes today. I've been thinking about starting a second army for a while, and after reading the first Heretic and Know No Fear, it was clear that the Wordbearers were the way to go. Because really, besides orcs, who else is mad enough to use their own ships as battering rams? As I was rummaging through my ever-growing pile of shame, I came across the Cursing model from Age of Sigmar. That's when I realized I didn't have a master possession yet, and for Wordbearers, basically a crime. After all, their most famous warriors are the Gal Vorbak, space marines possessed by demons, gaining supernatural strength, speed, and resilience. The Curseling had everything I needed. Big bulky armor? Check. A big imposing staff? Check. A horrifying, otherworldly entity bursting out of his body? Double check. It was a perfect fit. Now let's get to work. The first step was removing the distinctly Tzeentchian elements from the model. We want him to be an undivided marine, so for that, it's gotta go. So that starts with his shoulder pad. To make him read as a Chaos Space Marine, I needed those iconic and big bulky pads. So I took my sprue clippers and carefully and uncarefully trimmed away the unwanted detail, before going in with my hobby knife to smooth the area. Just took the side of it and slowly scraped away, finally leaving off this big clean surface to attach a shoulder pad from the Legionary's box, using plastic glue. I positioned it slightly higher than normal to bulk up his silhouette just a bit and help him match the rest of the Chaos Marine range. Now came the real challenge, green stuff sculpting. Green stuff's a two-part epoxy that when mixed gives you about a 2-hour working time before it hardens. Don't have a ton of experience with it, but I was eager to give this a try. So first I swapped out the head, choosing a helmet from the Legionary kit, one with big ol' impressive horns. Since the Curseling's original head was integrated into the model, I had to shave down the neck slot, where I then placed a small ball of green stuff into the gap, and then pressed the new helmet into it. To blend the transition in, I sculpted some subtle folds, trying to mimic the sci-fi undersuit texture that you often see on Space Marines. Next, I tackled the power pack. Initially, I was debating whether to include one at all. After all, the Curseling has a very distinct silhouette with a lot of details on his back. But without the power pack, he just didn't feel like a proper Space Marine. So I placed another blob of green stuff between his shoulders and pressed a Chaos backpack into it. Since the demon emerging from his torso made the model look like it was mutating, I tried to blend the power pack into the flesh of the model. Using my nylon sculpting tool, I smoothed the edges so it looked like it was growing out of the back of the mutated creature, a natural extension of the possessed form. Now to truly sell him as a word bearer, you need some scripture. Wordbearers are infamous for their devotion to the Primarch Lorgar, inscribing passages from his book, The Word, onto their armor and parchments. To replicate this, I rolled out some thin snakes of green stuff, flattening them and draping them over his armor as if scrolls were hanging from his shoulder pad. I used a flat-bladed tool to press them into place, and then followed the contours of his armor for a natural flow to integrate it into the model. This is a simple technique that adds tons of characters to an army, and once you get the hang of it, it only takes a few minutes per model. Across my Wordbearer army, I ended up adding these parchments. I think they really add a lot of character to it and really make the model feel like your own. So if you're doing a Wordbearer's army like me, I'd highly recommend doing the same thing. So with our converting done, it's time to get him painted. If you watch some of my recent videos, you know I've been testing out ways to paint miniatures quickly while still achieving a high quality look. After all, most of us don't have 10 plus hours to spend on a single model. So for this, I started with a black primer, followed by a heavy dry brush of dark plum from ProAcryl. This technique leaves only black in the deepest recesses, creating rich and moody shadows as a base. We're going to be going for a volumetric lighting approach, so for this, brighter surfaces will face the light, while shadow areas remain dark. Next, I did a dry brush of burnt red, a color similar to corn red, but with a more matte finish that I typically prefer. Combined with dark plum, it forms a solid base coat with built-in shading. Honestly, if you wanted a battle-ready army, you could probably stop here. 2 minutes of dry brushing, and you've got a great tabletop standard. And now we move into some brushwork. We're going to start with Bold Pyrrole Red from ProAcryl. Very similar, vibrant, punchy red tones like an Evil Sun Scarlet from Games Workshop. With this, we are focusing on accentuating our shapes, pushing our brightest and most vibrant tones towards the edges of the armor that are going to catch the most light. With this paint job, I really want to reflect the nature of the Wordbearer's brooding personalities. To do that, we're limiting our palette from pushing too far towards white. Instead, to punch our colors to the next level and keep visual interest, we're going to increase our vibrancy up to the point of swapping to either pink or orange. Once we have that accomplished, as a means of tying everything together, I'm going to take a little bit of red ink and glaze it across our surface. This is going to bring all of the colors together in a very vibrant and punchy way and really unify our shadows to our brightest highlights. And now onto the bane of every Chaos painter, the dreaded trim. It's funny how much of this detail gets hyped up as a nightmare when in reality, it's just a skill like anything else. Sure, Chaos models have a lot of it, but with the right approach, it's really manageable. There are two things to keep in mind when you're painting Chaos trim. One, pick a metallic paint that you know inside and out. Every paint behaves a little differently, some are thicker, some are runnier, some cover better than others. So you need to know exactly how much to thin your metallics and how they flow off your brush. The better you understand your paint, the easier this process becomes. And two, even bigger than the first, use the side of your brush, not the tip. When you drag the side of the brush along the raised trim, instead of trying to paint it head on, you get a much more clean and controlled application. For this model, I'm using Pro Acryl Metallics because I know exactly how they behave. But honestly, any brand will work as long as you're comfortable with it. For our parchments, we're doing a fairly standard color scheme that I think you've probably seen in other of my videos. Starting from XV88, this gives us a dirty brown base that's going to blend really nicely into a mid-tone of Agaros dunes. Biggest thing here is to keep it in line with the rest of the model, dark and gloomy. Wherever it may creep up to being a bit bright, hit it with a bit of skeleton horde contrast to pull it back into line. After all that's said and done, we're going to hit it with a very light highlight of Screaming Skull. And then with our horns, we're going to hit them with Agaros dunes to start, and then just do a really quick wash of a skeleton horde contrast. For metallic shading, I'm going to be going a little bit out of the ordinary, and instead of using a wash, using black ink. My preferred way to use inks is through glazing. That way you lightly tint the material you're applying over gradually. This allows for far greater control than a standard wash. For this sort of thing where I just want the metallics to get the shading, the glazing method is key. It ensures that we don't end up with accidental runoffs that pool on our bright red details. It just sits where we apply it. For the sword and feathers, I want to contrast my model in a couple of ways. Green and red are opposites of each other on a color wheel, and for that reason are complementary. So for this, we have a mortal and then also an unnatural presence. So I feel like the two kind of go hand in hand. The second way that we're going to contrast is through brightness. I want the sword to feel that it is imbued with an energy. After all, it is the accursed weapon of a follower of chaos. To do this, we're going to base our sword and also the unnatural feathers with warpstone glow before moving into a layer of moot green. You want to make sure the first layer is totally dry before you move into this step, unless you want kind of a crackly and uneven appearance. For this, I then picked out the top half of the sword with moot, and then also the top half of each feather with it. Next, on only the sword, I'm taking some white and setting up my next step of inks. I want the top half of the sword to be neon green as though it is emanating light. To do that, the easiest method I've found is bright colors underneath, and then white over top. Once that is fully set up, you can glaze a neon ink or paint over top of it to give it a glowing effect. We are then going to take our neon green ink and lightly glaze it over the entirety of the white blade. This does two things: it blends in all of our colors together, and it also creates that striking green over top of the white. To finish off our sword, I wanted this to be similar to the Avatar of Kane's flaming sword, with the exterior turning to a hardened stone look, so I dry brushed some black over top. Really not sure how I feel about how this ended up, so let me know what you think down below as I'm going to continue to work this under the army. And now for our little demon friend. I want him to feel alien, to really sit outside the realm of normal and contrast against what we've already established with the rest of this model. So we're going to go for a bright, kind of pinkish, inflamed skin. I want this portion of the model to be brighter than the rest, to really make it stick out and feel that much more unnatural. So we're going to start with a pinky flesh tone base to get us going. This will then allow us to give a quick wash of a Reichland flesh shade. This model has a ton of definition, so a wash should work out really well here. As I always say, don't set it and forget it, move it to where you want it, and don't let the wash pool anywhere that you don't want it to. We can then begin to layer up pallid witch flesh over a few passes, making sure that your paint is thinned properly while doing this. I found that this particular color has a habit of looking chalky, so the thinning will definitely help with that. While we do want to make this part of the model stick out, we don't want to change the overall feel, so make sure to direct the highlights towards the highest points and leave the recesses in shadow. This is going to make for a cohesive piece despite the brightness discrepancy. And now to add in that inflammation. I want the curseling to appear as though he is erupted from a Marine's armor. So anywhere that is interacting or touching with the armor, I want to appear red and sore. To do this, I'm going to glaze red ink into those areas. It's going to do two things: drive up the vibrance up, and then also make it look very bright. For our eye lenses, we're going to be doing a standard dot of white on the lens itself, before returning with that same neon green ink as before to make it glow. For this, I do like to flood the lens just a bit to make it give that impression of a nice OSL. On to the most important and final portion of any word bearer, the text of his book. For this, it's where the fun begins. For the armor text, I use thin white lines to freehand the scripture, making it appear like sacred or heretical blessings scrawled across his plating. Once the white had dried, I went over it with a glaze of neon green, giving it the effect of a glowing eldritch script. For his parchment, I just went with black ink just to carefully paint out the writing. This is one of those details that really sells the theme of the army. When you look at a word bearer, you should immediately be able to tell they are zealots, fully devoted to their faith. And that will do it for this model. With surprisingly little effort, we transformed the Curseling from Age of Sigmar into a master of possessions for 40k. We did what I'd consider a grimdark paint job without any oils, pigments, or otherwise advanced techniques, and all in all, I think the scheme is easy to replicate across an army. I'm looking forward to doing more conversions and paint jobs for my Word Bearers army, so stay tuned. Also, I'm planning on setting up a member section for this page. If you'd be interested, I think we're going to include a Discord server for hangouts, tips and tricks, and painting advice, as well as potentially some other benefits. If this would be something you're interested in, let me know in the comments, alongside some other benefits that you think would make it worth your while. Alrighty guys, I will catch you in the next one. Have a good one.